Any questions? The kids are...
Can I just make one observation that came from what you were sharing? That I used to live with somebody who was getting into life coaching. And
Somebody who was?
getting into the business of life coaching, they called it. And they were really focused on developing clarity about their values. And they were really insistent on doing that with their clients. And something in it always had it always felt fabricated, it always felt very limited and very like the guise of enlightenment or open, but actually confused. And just the way you described that, the freedom doesn't have a precondition. Yeah.
Yes, and really, the values cannot be defined externally. They have to come from the heart. And the highest value is happiness and freedom. I mean, they are one and the same. You cannot be happy without freedom. And you cannot be really free if you're not happy. So, freedom and happiness are the values that every human being cherishes. Whether they admit it or not is irrelevant, because they all seek happiness and freedom. All beings. Nobody seeks the lack of freedom or the lack of happiness. So that's our most common denominator, and any value that comes from that place, if you will, which is a direct consequence of this fundamental value, freedom dash happiness or whatever, which is in fact consciousness, the experience of consciousness.
What do you mean by heart? That word in this case,
it's a poetic expression.
Okay.
If I want to be logical, I speak of reality and of consciousness. If I want to be poetic, I use the word heart. So, equate them. They are the same. In my book.
Thank you.
I want to connect to what Ezra said. I don't see so much a problem here, but I want to run my logic through or present it to you. And it may not be connected, but this is just what I thought. Well, maybe the first question, you avoided to say, you say, I've made an observation, not a critique. I don't even see what's wrong with the critique.
There is a distinction to be made between critiquing, being critical about, or criticizing concept, ideas, conclusions, and criticizing people. So criticizing conclusions, ideas are okay. Criticizing people is okay as long as you are criticizing their conclusions, opinions, etc. But when we are because then what we mean opinions, conclusions that emanate from this source. We don't criticize the source, you see. When it becomes ignorance is when we attribute a localized origin to these falsities or concepts or conclusions, etc.
Yes, and maybe this is what the problem in the understanding was, or is also, to get your head around the fact that consciousness is criticizing itself, not talking to itself. I was reminded of what you said, John Klein said. When he addressed something, he was saying in a very loving way, "Oh, that's not you. That's so much not you." So kind of talking to the consciousness and reminding consciousness that it is so much more intelligent than to go that direction.
Yeah, that's diplomatic license. But diplomatic license is not necessary, because sometimes, if somebody tells you 2 plus 2 equals 5, the math teacher is going to say simply, no, 2 plus 2 I'm sorry, 2 plus 2 equals 4. The math teacher is not going to tell the guy, it's not like you to say 2 plus 2 equals 5. Which leads me to something, and which is a total, because a critical, the ability to criticize is very important, because that's how scientific progress arises. If nobody criticizes the previous theory, or if you don't criticize that Einstein theory because he was Jewish, and it's politically incorrect to criticize someone who is Jewish, you see, then anything goes. You see, so it's very important to understand that criticism of ideas is something extremely important, and it ties together to the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. And it's very important for the wellness of society as a whole. And any attempt to curtail and to prohibit any form and to criminalize any form of criticism and to censor any form of criticism of ideas is utterly wrong. Because it flies in the face of truth. Truth requires this freedom to emerge. You cannot keep truth forever in a box. At some point it will come out of the box. But it's better to have boxes without a lid on them. And where we are going right now, and the perversion is this. What I say, don't criticize the person. Criticize the idea. But the perversion is the assumption that there is a person there. And that if you criticize the idea, you criticize the person. That's what's going on in our colleges. That's what's going on in the left in this country, all over. All over. It's a total perversion. And as a former guy from the left, that was the opposite ideas we were defending in the old days. In the old days, we were defending the freedom of expression. We were defending the freedom of women, and not totalitarian belief systems that treat women like cattle. So there is this total perversion going on nowadays. I get a little excited. For the sake of freedom, for the sake of truth, for the sake of fairness. It's okay to criticize ideas. I mean, every time I say something, if someone asks a question, you are criticizing me. You see, because you are making objections. And it is precisely because we are making objections to one another that the truth can emerge. If you have a censorship, you pretty soon have Hitler and Stalin and the Pope. Yeah? Yeah? You cannot print something without the Pope giving you permission. You cannot publish something on Facebook without having, what's the name of this guy, the head of Facebook, giving this permission.
No, I was having a discussion with Chair, and we were like talking a little bit about politics, and but I think that the beautiful thing was that we had this openness right at the beginning to really listen to what the other had to say, and I think this is what you were talking about, that when you are interested in first like scientifically finding out what are the facts and how can we improve. Of course, you may have still different goals, but I think we were pretty clear that the goals were, like you said about Ramana Maharshi, that the lives of many people should improve. That's a good thing, whatever that means, but we have to talk about that. But if that openness is there, then the willingness is there to see, okay, let's sort out if we have the same, if we have the same facts, or do we see them differently, which is a scientific approach. And then the so-called person, or the person is not coming in. I was just also reminded of, I'm jumping a bit, but there was this mathematician guy who had like worked so long on this one theory, and another mathematician guy from my hometown, this is why I came about it and read about it, he even flew to Japan, looked at all this work that he had done. It was something that was supposed to be very important, and he said, I don't see that you have proven this very thing. And he was very angry, this Japanese guy, being criticized. I mean, he could have been like, okay, I see your point, maybe I have to work on this, but he was not willing to take it because he had put so much effort into that. And he was getting, on a personal level, being very, putting the German guy down like you don't even know the basics, although he's a very renowned mathematician. So my point is, it's so obvious that the moment the emotions, the feelings get in, there is no progress possible in that moment. So I think what we found in our conversation, that's very freeing, that you always go back and see, are we still on the same page? Are we still interested in seeing how the facts are and then finding a solution? Or are we just in the mode of defending?
Yeah.
What our time?
Our positions we have taken, and in which case we identify with this position, with a party, with a soccer team, with whatever, and we are cooked.
Now one last step back to consciousness. So on the absolute level. So it is part of the game that consciousness kind of like criticizes itself in different roles, so to speak, to also to come back to itself more. Can we say that?
Yes. The criticism that comes from truth takes us back to truth. The criticism that comes from ignorance keeps us in ignorance.
And so maybe the thing is like, is there something, because this is something that comes to mind. You often say, don't teach the dog. I mean, don't teach the dog. Don't teach the dog, like, don't tell somebody something about the truth who didn't ask for it. Yeah, I think this is what you said. So maybe it's a little confusion here also. When do you, because if you say, let's talk about the facts, let's talk about these things, how should we do these things? Then in a way, of course, you are saying, okay, me as consciousness doesn't want you consciousness to, you know, put roadblocks in the way of, for example, putting women down. You see, if you see like, oh, you're putting women down, you say that they are inferior, you as consciousness say that's not.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
We are all the same consciousness.
Yes.
You know?
And when do you, because I think maybe this person didn't ask for it, you see? That's because you're kind of like saying, this is wrong, this is not a good thing. So when are you entitled, so to speak, to go in that kind of confrontation? You see what I mean? Because if maybe somebody's not asking for it, but in this case it seems that you say we have to address the issue of the truth being held down.
I was making observations about society and its evolution and towards a direction of totalitarianism. And that's when the totalitarianism on the left meets the totalitarianism on the right, you know, and you end up with always the same thing, censorship, you know, lack of freedom, power to the state instead of that. That's how it ends up. Remember that National Socialism has the word socialism in it.
I'm very aware of that fact. No, I can see it because in my country, what I would say is, in certain degrees, I mean, or places going on, is like this totalitarianism. Yeah, kind of, because the facts, some people don't want to see the facts, you know, they're not there yet what the Nazis have done because they were so well trained to do it, but also the GDR, you know, the German Demo, they did the same thing. But coming back to it, maybe this is the answer, because you were talking about outrage yesterday. The moment there is true outrage, impersonal anger, is the moment when, of course, it is the right thing to do, so to speak, for consciousness to say, look, I address this issue now, because it's wrong the way the society is going. So in a way, consciousness is criticizing consciousness.
Yeah, we cannot, to answer your question, which was like, when to speak and when not to speak. It has to be decided on the spot. You see, we cannot have a rule book again who says when to speak, when not to speak. You see, it depends. That's why the right action cannot be predefined. It has to be defined in context, in a given situation. But I feel that regarding this freedom of expression, if we prohibit things, for instance, in Europe, we prohibit anything which is Nazi, you know, anything. And we have these people, you know, trying to come up with that anyway. And the more we prohibit it, the more there is this impression that, oh, if it is prohibited, there must be some truth in it, you know. If it has to be defended by violence and by, there must be some truth. Whereas I could see in America, you could see Mein Kampf you could read Mein Kampf in America, it's not prohibited. And people who were with David Duke and this, they were looked at like lunatics. You see, the more you try to censor, I think it goes in the wrong direction, because you prevent this free debate of ideas, which is the beauty of, in fact, of democracies. You know.
And also the beauty of, coming back, of course, of philosophies, because I think...
And of philosophy, exactly. What I don't understand is why in academia nowadays, especially in these countries, there is this opposition to precisely this free debate of ideas, that academia itself is committing suicide. That I don't understand.
Because I'm pretty sure that somebody like Kant would have taken the criticism and would have gone, it's just assuming, you know.
Yes.
But I think he would have been like, okay, I take this back to my Denkstube, you know, in his own thinking about it, and then coming back and
with 500 pages.
maybe, or maybe coming back like Thomas von Aquin, you know, who was said earlier, but he was said that he stopped speaking and stopped writing at the end of his life, which kind of is also a message. Maybe that he understood that a lot of his big theory was a little bit too much, maybe.
The beauty of science, real science, hard science, is that precisely the example you gave with this mathematician is an exception. The beauty of mathematics and physics is that, in fact, it plays itself out, just the opposite of what you described. That if a mathematician has worked on a theory for years, and someone points at a mistake he has made, he will say, thank you. You know, I have improved that proper, and that is deeply ingrained in the scientific mind. That's how we are taught. You know, that scientific attitude. It's utter respect for the truth, regardless. You know, it's this thing, the truth regardless. Nothing but the truth, yes.
A couple things you said that I just want to point out something or point out one ask about the groups that are kind of hate groups. You know, you mentioned David Duke. I think a line can be drawn or has been drawn when they're advocating harm against other people. Tom Metzger was the head of the KKK, and he actually lived in Fallbrook, where I taught high school for many years. And finally, he was arrested. When I was teaching there, his son would put white power pamphlets all over the school. He was finally arrested and the government basically took everything he owned because his publications were advocating killing people of color and so on. So it was like advocating murder. So I think in some cases, obviously people are gonna, like you said, the David Duke followers were kind of crazy people. But at a certain point, when do you say, this is, you know, you're basically advocating that they harm and kill others. So I think there should be a line drawn, and I was happy when he was finally stopped from what he was doing, this particular individual.
Well, I don't think that we should censor someone saying white power or black power or yellow power.
Right, I agree. But when you say, you know,
or
white people go out
Indian
and
power.
Okay, that was, I just wanted to mention
No,
that.
no, because
no,
you
I
seem
agree.
to,
White power, yeah,
you know,
no, fine, okay, but then when you start advocating harming individuals, that's a different thing. But
like going in your face of people in restaurants.
like what?
Going in your face of people who eat in restaurants because they work in some administration rather than the other. Would that be okay?
What do you mean going in your face?
Kicking people out of your restaurant? Sure.
Oh, yeah. I don't, to me, that's like that's, if somebody, I don't even want to get into that. That's like individual.
Yeah, I see why.
Like
I can see why.
No, that's like a really muddy thing. It's a muddy thing. If you know, she's a public figure. I don't know about that. I don't think laws should be made about either. I mean, are you going to protect everybody that eats in a restaurant from other people talking to them? That's like an individual thing. I wouldn't do that, but I don't know what you're saying would be the opposite.
No, but because we have to define at which point for society things become there is a difference between being rude and doing something which is a misdemeanor or criminal or a felony. You see, at some point, you cannot allow people to do certain things or to say certain things. You know,
Right. Well,
tell
this is
people,
the line of
tell
freedom
people
of
to
speech.
build bombs, you know, and to put bombs in schools. You know, I don't think that perhaps that should be allowed, but then it should be criminalized. And society, there is a societal consensus to have laws that criminalize things. Yes.
No, exactly.
But including speech, but speech in extremely rare circumstances. That's my point.
No, I agree with you. And that's what I was just like pointing out the line of, where.
I think we agree. I think we agree that to say that cops should be killed and should be burnt or put in the oven and baked or something like that, and that blacks should be killed, are equally racist, equally disgusting, and perhaps should be prohibited. But then if it is prohibited on one side, it has to be prohibited on all sides.
Yes, but there could be nuance.
I can see that you don't agree with that. I could see that you don't agree.
Let's say this. If there was a group that was advocating to certain people go kill cops and bake them or whatever, yeah, that should be prohibited. It has to be, you have to look at the nuances of the circumstance. If just people...
What are the nuances? If you have white powers in the street, you know, behind that saying, kill black people, right? And if you have a black people kill cops, what's the difference?
Perhaps organization. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. But no, I agree. That's not okay. That's not good. But
yeah, exactly. I think everybody will say it's not okay. I mean, it makes sense. Things have to be mutual. We have to be reasonable.
I'm all for reason. So I'd like to get to the other thing. You mentioned academia and how it's changing. And as you know, I recently retired from academia. There was a lot of freedom in the classroom and outside the classroom to talk about anything. In fact, I think people that came into our classes got to explore topics totally freely, more than maybe they ever had in their lives, and were exposed to many ideas. I'm wondering, so I'm not sure what you're talking about, except I'm going to suggest two possibilities. One, I've heard about certain people were invited to come to campus to speak, and then the students, or maybe also professors, demonstrated
prevented
and said,
it from happening, and violently.
And then the campus backed down and they uninvited them. So
yes.
Yeah, so that that's probably not a good thing.
Or a woman who had been persecuted by her religion wanted to testify in some campus, had been invited, and then was cancelled because it was not politically correct to criticize his religion.
Yeah, that doesn't sound okay to me.
Yeah, because for me, religions are belief systems, and something also which is very current nowadays is if you go after a religion, a specific religion, you're called a racist. In the old days, when I was manifesting, against that, what we understood as racism was not religion. It was the physical attributes of a person. Because we are not responsible for our physical attributes. There is nobody. But regarding our values and concepts, they are open to criticism. You see, so to call a racist someone who criticizes a religion, for instance, is a perversion of the word. The meaning has changed because race and religions are different things, especially if the religion in question has white, has people from all colors. So it's very important because, I mean, the age of enlightenment is only, 400 years old. And it has liberated us from the persecution operated by religions. Right. And now if we cannot criticize, we are cooked.
No, I agree. I just want to point out that a lot of what we hear about that's going on in universities and so on is what we hear in the news, and they're always looking to dramatize things to make money. So I'm hoping that I don't work there anymore, but I'm hoping that there still is a lot of openness and free speech going on in the schools where people are able to explore different ideas. I just think we don't really know. We hear what goes on in the news, and the news only presents part of the picture. I was just going to mention that.
What I find very, very disturbing is a position taken by professors publicly on this issue of free speech. You read constantly articles, for instance, about the dangers. There was in the New York Times a few days ago some articles about the dangers of free speech.
Well, I'll look for that. Do you know who wrote it?
I didn't read it. When I see something like that, it stings. So I don't feel like putting my nose further into it.
Well, I'm curious. Sometimes the titles are misleading too, but okay.
I'm very wary of statutes that criminalize speech, because you mentioned before, well, if we could have a societal consensus of which speech is criminal, then that would be okay.
No. I was referring to screaming fire in a theater.
See, the thing is, in an area of the law that I teach, which is the legal aspects of assisting suicide, still in the majority of states in this country, assisting in a suicide is illegal. It's a felony. But the statute just says assisting someone to take their own life is a felony. Well, what does assisting mean? In the old law, the old cases was somebody in the bed was just too infirm to get up and load the gun, so you get up and load the gun and put the bullets in and say, here, go ahead. That was assisting in a suicide. There was physical proximity, and then there was the act of giving something tangible. So there have been a number, especially with social media, there have been a number of cases recently in which speech, those who just engaged in speech were found guilty of assisting in suicide. And they say hard cases make bad law. One was a fella in Minnesota who went on a blog for people contemplating suicide and said that he was a female nurse. And somebody said, well, gee, I'd like to hang myself, but the ceilings aren't high enough. So he described how you can tie a rope to one doorknob and put it over the top of the door and hang yourself that way. And then there was a woman in Toronto or in Canada somewhere who said, I want to kill myself, but you know, guns are too messy and I'm afraid. So he sent a detailed email back saying, no, you can still do it if you, with hypothermia, just jump off the bridge, and the St. Lawrence is at 34 degrees and you'll be gone in 3 or 4 minutes, which she did. So here's somebody in Minnesota who's never met either of these people, never had any physical contact, never provided the means. And this went up and down the Minnesota courts, and he was found guilty of assisting in a suicide. So when you look at a statute that says assisting in a suicide is illegal, one of the points of criminal law is supposed to alert you to the fact that, no, this is bad, that you shouldn't do this. Who's to know?
Yeah.
If you call me up on the phone and say, gee, I'm contemplating this, and we talk about, yeah, Francis, in your position, I think it's a good idea. Your illness is, you're going to have a really bad time. I encourage you to do it. Is that assisting in a suicide?
Yeah.
So those type of statutes, and let's say the instant share brought up. There is a federal statute that says inciting others to violence through speech is a crime, and the legal standard would be, would a reasonable person know that their speech would incite another to violence? You don't know that until a jury says yes or no. So it's very, very difficult in any statute to criminalize speech, because that is so open to interpretation at a later time.
Yeah, because according to this criteria, inciting others to violence, both the Bible and the Quran should be prohibited. Because the Quran says, if there is a Jew hiding behind, no, it's a hadith, it's not the Quran, but it's the same. It's, if there is a Jew hiding behind a stone, the stone will kill you. There is a Jew hiding behind me. Kill him. That's a hadith. So, if even Mein Kampf didn't say that, right? And we have prohibited Mein Kampf. So, if we go down that road, we should prohibit the Quran.
So it's a little bit like the definition of obscenity in the law is you know it when you see it. And just another case, there was a young couple who had a social media relationship. I think they saw themselves once. They lived miles apart. And he wanted to commit suicide, and she said, well, go ahead and do it. I encourage you. That's great. And so he's in his car and has a pipe connected to his tailpipe or hose in the door, and he's in the car and he calls her up and he says, I'm doing it. I'm doing it, and I think they're texting. And then she says, that's great, and he goes outside of the car and he says, I don't know if I can go through it, and she texts back and says, you're just a wuss, you're just a chicken. Get back in the car. And he does, and he dies, and she was convicted. And why I say hard cases is any one of us looking at that says, you are such a despicable human being. How can you do that? But there's something just unsettling about criminalizing speech. Now, if somebody's on a ledge, and you've seen the movies, and they're thinking of jumping, and there's a crowd below that says, jump, jump, is that now a crime? Is that criminalized? And it's interesting, too, that I've given these seminars to lawyers and non-lawyers, and I don't say who's been convicted or not. And so I'll ask the lawyers, should this person be convicted on these facts? And the overwhelming majority of lawyers say no. But for non-lawyers, they say yes. So it's a very, very difficult, very tricky area.
Yeah, but what is beautiful is that we seem to all agree, right? We seem to be all in favor of free speech. Right? Who is not? Yes.
I guess that I'm in agreement with free speech. I do think that I grew up in Chicago, which historically the police were so corrupt that when they wanted to dismantle the mob, they couldn't use anybody from the local forces. They had to bring in the untouchables of the FBI to bring down the mob. And as much as we'd like to think we live in different times, if you actually go to Chicago and go to the precincts, You can find a few good police, but it's way easier to find not good ones. In the 70s, Cabrini Green was a notorious housing project that was patrolled by mostly white officers. It was a 98% black community. And some of the officers were so criminal and violent and murderous that at one point the community decided to take action into their own hands and reported an emergency, and those officers responded, and they were executed. They were shot from a rooftop, and no one reported, they couldn't get any information about who had done it or why. But it was kind of, this is 70s, this isn't the Wild West in the 19th century, this is in my lifetime. And that's a type of vigilante justice. But if you actually grow up with that, and I actually had a window side view, I was one of 5 white kids in my junior high school. If you see institutional racism, and you try to equate that morally, where there are people that have never had anything done wrong to them that say kill blacks, and you see blacks that have endured unspeakable mistreatment for generations, and I mean that literally, and some of them can't take it anymore, and they're not violent, very dignified people, but they finally say enough's enough. It's a different type of free speech. I'm in agreement with all of those types of free speech, but just to equate them is to be naive about a reality that people have grown up with in this country. And I can give you, like, I won't bother to, but you know, the Cabrini Green is a kind of an extreme example, but I saw firsthand institutionalized racist treatment on behalf of police officers many times. And to pretend it doesn't exist or that it's all neutral, you can find police where they aren't racist and they're white and they are neutral. But for each of them, I could probably find 5 to 20 that are completely racist and not neutral at all.
Yes, but...
And that's an institution. At that point, it's a little bit like being Jewish and trying to fight against the Nazi stormtroopers. You could say, no, 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 no. I'm exaggerating. It's not that extreme. It's not that institutionalized. But at some point, you have to admit that these are government-sanctioned people with guns in your community, and it goes beyond free speech. You've got an actual sociological problem. What's coming out in the news now about blacks being killed, unarmed blacks, that's not news if you grew up where I grew up. It's just no one ever noticed before. That's been going on since I was a kid. I've witnessed it. It's just that I didn't have a video camera. I think at some point that has to be addressed if you want to live in a healthy society. And the fact that people are responding equivalently is, to me, troubling in that it actually misses a problem that's underneath that. And I don't think that's of service to the bigger society of freedom and love of truth that you're talking about, to do that.
Well, you're making the implicit assumption that all cops are rotten, because that's what these people say when they say we should just kill all of them. They are assuming that they are all bad people.
Not so.
Just like the other side, they are assuming that the blacks are inferior or bad people.
Not so.
Yeah,
You don't have to assume that all Nazis were terrible to say that you're against Nazism. They're against a form of policing that's been standardized.
Then the problem is that there are also bad people about the blacks. There are murderers there, there are rapists. And so then if you say that you can go after a whole group because of some bad apples in the group, there is no moral justification for that.
I'm less literal about it. I don't hear it that way. What I hear it as an alarm bell saying policing is broken, we have to do something. And it's been said since, I've heard people say it at different degrees, and finally no one listens. And finally it's at the level of, we would be better off without any police.
Can't we say that both things are equally despicable?
No. because that's like Trump saying there's problems on both sides, and it's not acknowledging an asymmetry. And I think that's disingenuous. And not only disingenuous, harmful. I actually think that's damaging.
Okay. In my view, every time we are making a distinction between groups, we are racist. Every time we bring about past history, we are perpetuating the problem. There is my friend, he's German. I was born during the war. These people over there, they did things despicable, including putting my dad in jail and wanting to kill him. He escaped, fortunately. But I had a hard childhood because of the condition in which we lived after the war. But 10 years after, I was going to Germany. I was in Germany, I had my friend in Germany. Why? Because we were mature enough to forget and to forgive all these problems we had. We didn't bring the past into the now. Let me finish. There are places in Europe, like Serbia and Kosovo. They had a war in the 1500s. And since the 1500s, they have carried this hatred, since the 1500s. So my point is, whatever has been done to my ancestors, I forget it, I forget it. We don't want to bring the past into the now. That's a way to perpetuate. That's what is happening look in there are places of the world where there are always injustices being done to people, and very, very bad things. Take South Africa, take many places. But it's better to forget and forgive than to bring the past to create more injustice in the now, which will create more resentment in the future and more racism and more infighting between groups.
I agree with that. I don't think that, I was talking about the past being brought, but
yes,
something
because, yes, because of slavery, there are not too many slaves still alive.
When it's not about, when something is institutionalized, when police are literally trained to use excessive force amongst each other, and it's institutionalized and condoned, not only condoned, licensed by the society, blindly, like saying, no, they're not racist, and ignoring the reality, that needs to be addressed as an institutional level. Because it's happening now, it's not the past. Someone probably today is getting wrongly arrested and beaten, possibly killed this week, mostly based on the color of their skin. It's institutional. So you're right, slavery's long over, and any corrective eventually should go away. If there's equal opportunity, those things should be temporary. I agree. You shouldn't carry the past forever. But what I'm trying to say is that when you take on a formal role in society, you're in service to something that's supposed to be higher than the way a lot of these people have acted. And just to say, oh, well, too bad they didn't, and make these equivalences is a problem. You can't fix things that way.
We are going to disagree on that. My view is to be totally colorblind, race blind, religion blind. We are all the same consciousness. Everything that goes in the way of that is a problem.
I want to make one other small point. It turns out that about 50% of all articles published in peer-reviewed physics journals are actually wrong, and people don't check them. So even though physics tries to hold itself as being such a high science, when you dig into the details, I can give an example. They used to have a thin film, a guy published evidence of thin film quantum effects. It turned out it was completely made up. And that, my friend who discovered it, because he spent his PhD trying to replicate it and found out it was a null result, dug deeper and found out eventually people admitted in the physics department, probably half of all articles are basically bogus. So even the high sciences aren't that great.
Francis, I noticed that there is some moment that I can see the thought arising that says that I'm a person, and the moment that the thought arises, and I can see it, I choose to not identify with it, and everything is awesome. So why I already made that choice, like deeply in myself, that I don't want to identify with the thought that says I'm a person. So why, when the thought arises, sometimes I go into it and then I lose myself in it. It's kind of like I already know, and sometimes I can practice the experiment that you teach, and sometimes I cannot, but I want to do it all the time. So why there is this moments that I just go along and with the thought that says that I'm a person?
The first thing you have to make sure of is when the thought I'm a person arises, that you don't kill the thought out of the belief I'm not a person, but that the thought kind of leaves you because of your understanding that you have no evidence that you are not a person. You see the difference? Because if you kill the thought every time, you are just repressing it, but some pressure builds up and the thought is going to come at you again. Whereas, when you have the thought, I'm a separate consciousness, and if you look at the evidence that seems to be in support of this belief, and you find there is no evidence, then the opposite takes place. The pressure disappears. It's like you are a pressure cooker and you open the thing and the pressure of the thought disappears. And at some point, the thought doesn't come back to you because there is no energy behind it. Whereas if you repress it, you don't allow for the pressure to disappear, you know. So you have to be very careful. Am I doing it out of religion because I believe Francis, and then that would be the wrong way, or I am doing it out of my own investigation, out of my own conclusion? You see, that's very important. Don't trust me. Trust yourself.
Okay, thanks.
So that relates to what I've been thinking about or wondering about or trying to clarify in terms of the experiments. In terms of the experiments that you recommend that we do for the rest of our lives. And the other day you were talking about that you could do the experiments of am I universal consciousness or am I limited on the level of thoughts or perception or bodily sensations. I believe you said that. And you were giving examples, and the one that I got that maybe prevented me from understanding the other ones that really resonated was, I believe you said something like if you're interacting with someone that you could, I don't think you used the word imagine, but that if your energetic body or your subtle body included that other person, that would be one way to do an experiment, and that would be on the level of perception, I suppose, right?
Yes, and bodily sensations, they are very, very intertwined. Yes. You can even, using your tactile arms, that way, hug the person.
And so, an example on the level of thought would just be an intellectual idea, or recognizing what she was saying, that I just had a thought, but
Yes, exactly. Yes. You kind of become aware of this moment when you think along the old lines of being separate.
Right. Yeah, and I found that just recognize. I just always say, "Oh yeah, I'm doing that,"
and especially when you make decisions, because then that leads to actions. And actions have consequences more than thoughts, if you will. That are, it's once you have purchased, hit the button at Amazon, it's oops, you know, buyer's remorse. You see, as long as you just contemplate the thing, it's just on the level of thoughts. So it's the same with thoughts. It's better to stop at the thought than to allow for the thought to lead to a decision and an action. So that's why decisions we have to be even more careful than about our thoughts.
So doing an experiment on the level of bodily sensations would be similar to what you were saying earlier?
Yeah, that's the same. To try often during the day to feel the space, to be the space. And then it comes more naturally to you. And also in our lives, to do our best to implement in our life the universal qualities of consciousness. Fairness, for instance, is one. Love, equality. You see, to treat everybody equally, to be fair, to be equal. And that's why we had this discussion with my friend that when attitudes or behaviors seem to forget, makes all these distinctions, and okay, it's okay for one group, and one group is a preferred group. That foster then resentment, and it's not conducive to peace. But I may be wrong. What do I know?
This question is just for fun, but I'm genuinely curious why you, I think, jokingly say that God is a woman.
Yeah. You have got me on that one.
Well, I love it. I love it. But I'm curious.
I was making a transition. Yeah, God is transitioning.
It's probably for the best.
I'm not sure the Pope would agree, but yes.
Francis, the question that remained for me kind of in the background all week was to do with why did Francis have us watch that crummy movie? Like
What?
Crummy movie.
Well,
and so the question.
You know what? You know, if you come again to a retreat, ever, you will have to see it again, and then I'll be administering the test to make sure that you know all the, for instance, when was she on to us, Freddie? And, from the beginning, she was on to us from the very beginning. So you will be administering a test to see whether...
Respectfully, I kept the question with me, although I did ask a number of people just for fun. Just for fun. Why do you think it? And no one knew, not one person knew. But still, it intrigued me, and the ending was so great. So I kept the question in the background, just sort of bubbling there.
Okay, I have an answer for you. Humor is the highest expression of truth. Because it relates to freedom. It's freedom right off the bat. You know, it's
Yeah.
humor. It's the highest expression.
Well, also,
You know, love is too wet.
yeah.
Intelligence is too dry. Humor is just perfect.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. The actual answer did come this morning, sitting in the meditation, showed itself crystal clear, with a thought form that arose, full of charge and full of and then there was this slow chuckle in the background, and it came and it just spoke as myself. Oh yeah, you could do that. You could do one more round, and it had a freedom and an enjoyment and a to it about, oh, that's why he had us watch Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. So anyway, big opening from that crummy movie. Yeah.
Well, I must say it was extremely sweet. It was. I wish you all a sweet and nice journey. Thank you.